Hi, welcome back to Tiny Garage Fabrication. Once again, we're working on the 1972 Chevy C10 shop truck. Today we're going to focus on getting at least the front half of the exhaust figured out, as well as maybe a little bit of wiring, finishing up some teeny tiny touches on the fuel system. Then I'm going to look into the clutch pedal and clutch master cylinder so that we can get the whole system thrown together before we really get into the weeds on the wiring and the fuel injection. Stay tuned, let's get to work. So here's something that's kind of a new concept to me, ordering a set of headers that actually fit the engine and the chassis. These are just some cheap painted Headman headers. I may ceramic coat these a little bit later on, but for now, we're doing the mock-up, making sure everything fits, and I'm about to run into a snag. Alright, so real quick change of plans on the direction of this video. I got the headers, mocked up. I crawled underneath, I was looking at how I want to route the exhaust, and given how low this truck's going to be, and I want to do a 2-into-1, so dual 2.5s into a 3-inch, I'm not going to have the clearance to do that. So I went ahead and I ordered an aftermarket Crossmember that has cutouts for exhaust, as well as changing the geometry for the rear control arms, because really that needed to be done anyway. The Crossmember wasn't wildly expensive, and it was available, so I went ahead and, bought it. Bought a ton of other stuff too. Stuff that ultimately I will need to make this thing the way I want it to be. So now I have to go do the dreaded task of cutting out more rivets. Now there are 14 gigantic rivets that hold the Crossmember in, and then there are 4 more rivets total that hold the rear upper shock mounts in place, and I have to cut all those as well because I have to change those mounts also, which I also ordered. So I'm going to get suited up, I'm going to crawl into the truck, and I'm going to get to doing this terrible job, and I'll film as much as I can. Here's the main Crossmember, and here are some of the rivets on the one side, as well as its supporting plate. There's 5 rather large rivets here, and there's 2 rivets across the top that are extremely hard to get to because of the cab being on the frame, so I'm going to have to get them from inside. I'm going to have to unhook the control arms themselves, but they do need to come out anyway, as well as the rest of the rear suspension here. I'm taking these upper shock mounts out to put in an aftermarket version that angles the shock more up and down so that they actually work better on lowered trucks. In order to do that, I need to cut the rivets that hold these top brackets on, and I need to pull the bottom brackets off, and I'm going to pull everything else out while I'm at it. So this is one of the best ways to remove these rivets. Just kind of get a cutting disc and cut an X in their heads. Now one key to this is finding a hardened chisel for the air hammer, otherwise they'll just kind of deform. The ones that generally come with the cheaper air hammers. And once all the rivets are off, then I can try to grind it flat here so nothing sticks out, get this reinforcement plate off, and then try to drive the rivets up through the frame. As you can see, there's a fair amount of struggling here. I mentioned in a previous video that the more layers that these rivets have to go through, they kind of start to zig and zag and they don't just push straight through. So that's why there's such a struggle. Now I can't fit my big grinder in, so I'm using my Dremel to cut the X in these upper rivets, and then we'll get in here again with my chisel and try to shear these heads off. Space is extremely tight and limited because I have brake lines and fuel lines and the parking brake lines, everything's still in the way. I finally got everything out, and now we got to try to separate or get the rivets themselves out, and it's not working out very well. Now I still have the rearmost rivets on the upper and the lower side to still pull out. They're not coming out at all. They're kind of acting as dowel pins holding it in place, but that's okay because I want to get all the rear suspension off. So that way if there's any tension from the rear suspension pushing forward on these bars, I don't want this whole Crossmember to kind of spring forward and either hit me or pinch my hand or damage something. So I'm going to go ahead and drop all the rear suspension from the Crossmember back because I have to take it out anyway. So I'm going to start with the trailing arms, and then we'll move back and get to the shocks as well as these springs. Now the springs are held in by little cups that capture the small end of the coil, and there's just a single bolt through the top and then a long bolt through the bottom. And then we'll move on to the shocks, just a single upper and lower bolt. And I also need to take the track bar off because I've got an adjustable track bar, which will allow me to keep the rear end centered once it's lowered. And I'll kind of explain that when I put it in. And it'll give me a chance to remove the rear end and clean a lot of this extremely thick grime off of it. Now here these long control arms are held in by a single bolt on the front, and you notice how they're kind of biased towards the bottom side of the crossmember. Well, my new crossmember will move that mounting point upwards, which when you lower everything, if you kind of think about this lever and the angle things are at, when the rear end goes up, then when I move the forward mounting points up, it kind of restores that geometry with the drive shaft and the overall suspension motion. So that's just another reason why I'm replacing the crossmember. The rear shocks come out easily enough, just a couple of 1/2-inch bolts, and they pop right out.
Now, if it looks like this is a terrible idea, it is. If I loosen this, the spring will push down and it'll fucking crush me. So maybe I should go somewhere else. What do you think?
Alright, so after relocating my body for less chance of death, I'll go ahead and try to work on the U-bolts that hold the trailing arm to the rear end. And this is just a single massive U-bolt on either side. And these are pretty corroded and they're giving me a heck of a time here. After working on the U-bolts for just a little bit before I completely free them, I want to get the rear spring mounts out. And these are also fairly corroded, so a 2-foot breaker bar is what's required here. And then I can move on to a ratchet and start working on getting these cups out. The cups have a little hex or a square on the top of them so you can hold them in place while you pull the long bolt out. You can see the little cup laying there next to the bolt. Now I'll lift the control arm to keep it from just like sagging or getting in my way, and we'll slowly start working the nuts off the U-bolt, and eventually we'll get everything dropped out of there. Now that the suspension's out of the way, I'm going to get to work on trying to get these last 2 rivets out of each side here. I'm going to try to drill through them to see if that will make them any easier to punch out. And it wasn't. Now as you can see in these shots, I'm having to kind of flex the frame and the crossmember in different ways. You can see how those rivets are acting as dowel pins, holding this whole crossmember in place. And get some more stuff out of the way, and then they got caught again. The crossmember has to move forward in order to get it out. But she's moving now, and I'm super stoked about that. Now you can see those upper rivets, how they just would not come out. They're pretty much seized in the frame. I'm going to have to do a lot of grinding and smashing to get those things out of there. And you can also see how they acted as dowel pins to keep it in place. These rear rivets were significantly smaller and going through much thinner metal. That little bed brace is not very thick, unlike the frame. So these popped out pretty easily. There's a view from underneath the truck. There's the transmission all the way up there, sans crossmember, frame rails. Nothing going on up here yet. And all the way to just a jack holding the rear end in place, or the back of the frame in place. But that's what we're looking at. Whole lot of empty space, and we'll fill it back up tomorrow. This is the spoils of war here. These rear coil springs, I don't know why they're so close in the middle, but they're going away. I got new ones. This here is the rear shock mount bracket, so that was under there like that. That's going away. The upper ones I just cut out, those are going away. These U-bolts I need to keep for right now, but I do want to show you this. This was the driver's side one, heavily corroded. I'm going to be doing 2-inch drop blocks, which means that it will come with new U-bolts, so eventually these will be going away. I went to order new ones of these, but all the reviews said that this bolt was too short to work effectively, and I was like, you know, mine will be all right. So let's see, we can get rid of this, and we can get rid of this, we can get rid of this, and what else? The main crossmember. This thing was a pain in the butt to get out. Here's that one rivet that I drilled through, and I tried to punch out, and yeah, there's no way that thing was coming out. I've still got a little bit of work to do to get these ones out of the frame itself, but this will be replaced with something a little more streamlined. I have some new poly bushings for these control arms, but I don't think I'm going to put them in yet. I think I'll probably wait until I do the drop blocks, just because I'm seriously out of time. You have no idea what I'm about to go through in the next couple of weeks, so I don't have time to work on that. I'm not going to have time to, you know, blast or powder coat or paint these things, so they're going to go back in as is. And also this, got the adjustable track bar, so that'll be going away, but I've got to get this big pin out because that's what locates it to the rear end. All right, well, I am thoroughly filthy and thoroughly irritated by having to do all that work, and it's all just so that I can run exhaust. Okay, maybe not just so I can run exhaust, but for the most part, that's kind of what perpetuated me actually changing the Crossmember with something aftermarket. I had no intentions of doing so from the start, but after I kind of assessed the situation down there, I realized that it was my best bet, and it's going to correct suspension geometry and do a few other things for me, and it really wasn't terribly expensive, you know, big picture of things. So next episode, we're going to be very lightly cleaning this stuff up, cleaning up under the truck just a little bit, and then installing all of the new parts because most of them came in today. Very quick turnaround. Summit Racing was awesome in getting that stuff to me super fast. I paid for all of it, not sponsored, blah, 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 blah. But if you do want to help me out, make sure to hit that like button, leave some comments, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. All that helps this channel immensely so that I can afford to bring you more awesome projects in the future. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next video.